Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Becomes Sea God Poseidon? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. I'm sorry ma'am, but your son is quirkless, the doctor said, his tone serious. Izuku Yagi, known as pro-hero Teletrix and mother of twins Izuku and Izumi, stared at him in shock. She had brought her children to the hospital to discover what quirks they would inherit, but the news about Izuku was devastating. But your daughter, Izumi, has a quirk, the doctor continued. It's called Telehance. She can use telekinesis, and with training, she may even enhance her strength and speed to rival yours. Really? Izumi exclaimed, her young voice filled with excitement. Inko beamed with pride. Oh, that's amazing. I always knew you were meant for big things. She pulled her daughter into a warm embrace, showering her with kisses. Izuku watched, confusion etched on his face. Although he felt a pang of disappointment over his own quirklessness, he tried to brush it off, reminding himself that he hadn't planned on becoming a hero anyway. Come on, let's go home. Inko called, her voice cheerful. Okay. Izumi replied, and they began to leave. Izuku rushed after them, calling for them to wait. The doctor watched the young boy with concern, hoping he would be all right, especially in a world so drastically changed by quirks. As Inko and Izumi climbed into the car, Izuku hurried over, but before he could reach them, they drove off, leaving him alone. He felt a mix of confusion and determination as he steeled himself to walk home. The late afternoon sky was beginning to turn orange as Izuku trudged along, exhaustion weighing heavily on him after walking several miles from the hospital. His stomach growled, prompting him to mutter, "I should get something to eat." He opened the door to find his father, Toshinori, at home. "Hi, Dad," Izuku called out, but Toshinori didn't respond, seemingly oblivious to his presence. "Dad?" Izuku's voice trailed off, sadness creeping in as he realized he was being ignored. Shaking his head, he decided to retreat to his room. As he climbed the stairs, he pondered why his parents were suddenly distant, concluding that they were likely too busy to notice him. Upon entering his room, he was startled when Izumi suddenly knocked him to the ground. Pain shot through his head as he looked up to see her face twisted in anger and disgust. "What do you think you're doing? Freaks like you don't need stuff," she shouted. What are you talking about?" Izuku stammered, bewildered by her harshness. Without a word, Izumi used her quirk to lift him and slammed him against the wall before throwing him to the floor. "You better shut up and be grateful that a freak like you even has a roof over your head," she spat, her tone dripping with contempt as she closed the door and walked away. Left alone, Izuku cried on the floor, his body bruised and bloodied. He hoped desperately that this was just a bad dream from which he would awaken. But when morning came, it was clear that it was all too real. On the last day of middle school, Izuku sat quietly, minding his own business. Ever since he had been declared quirkless, he had become an outcast both at school and at home. The classroom buzzed with excitement, but he remained isolated, avoiding eye contact with anyone. A few minutes after class began, the teacher entered with a stack of papers. "All right, everyone, it's time we talk about your futures." The class groaned in response. "Just kidding. I know you all want to be heroes," the teacher exclaimed. Everyone except Izuku, Izumi, and the Bakugo and Todoroki twins eagerly used their quirks. Izuku sighed quietly, wishing the day would end. "All right, settle down. You know the rules, no quirk usage in public," the teacher reminded them. Izuku rolled his eyes, recalling how others had used their quirks against him without consequence, as if they took pleasure in his suffering. "Now, we have quite a few students going to UA, the teacher announced, prompting chatter among the students. "First up, the Todoroki twins. No doubt in my mind that you both will get in." They thanked the teacher, beaming with pride. "Next, the Bakugo twins. Decent grades and good control over your quirks. I'd say you could get in without a problem." Katsuki Bakugo began boasting arrogantly about how UA only accepted the best, leading to a heated argument with the class. "Oh, Izuku, aren't you going to UA?" the teacher asked, drawing the attention of the class. They turned to look at him, but he avoided their gazes. Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but laughter erupted from his classmates. Katsuki approached him, blowing up his desk in an attempt to intimidate him. Yet, Izuku remained unfazed, not even flinching. "Why don't you just stop while you can, Deku? You don't even have a quirk, so what's the point in going to UA?" "Huh?" Katsuki taunted. "Ugh, you're so annoying." Izuku muttered, annoyance creeping into his voice as he turned away. The class was taken aback. They had never heard him speak like that, especially not to Katsuki. "What, you think you're tough just because you applied to UA?" Katsuki sneered. Izuku didn't respond, his gaze fixed elsewhere. "Why don't you look at me when I'm talking to you, Deku?" Katsuki snarled, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him close. "Because why would I bother looking at someone who is nothing more than an annoyance and an a-hole to everyone around him?" Izuku replied in an emotionless tone, tinged with annoyance, still refusing to meet his gaze. The class was stunned. Izuku had just stood up to Katsuki, something he had never done before. Even Izumi was shocked, as her brother had always been shy and timid, never considering fighting back or talking back to anyone, let alone Katsuki. Katsuki, more furious than ever, decided to strike Izuku with a punch, only for Izuku to catch it effortlessly. The shock was evident on Katsuki's face as he felt pressure building in his arm. "Let go of my arm," he shouted, but Izuku ignored him, increasing the pressure until Katsuki was on his knees. The sound of bones cracking echoed in the air, and as he looked into Izuku's eyes, he felt a wave of sheer terror wash over him. No one intervened, even the teachers stood frozen, intimidated by the unprecedented situation. Without a second thought, Izuku punched Katsuki to the ground. His cold, lifeless eyes were filled with nothing but hate, disdain, and disgust as he continued to rain punches down on Katsuki's face. "Deku, stop this now. Or else." Izumi cried, rushing over to intervene. But Izuku charged at her, landing a punch squarely on her jaw before grabbing her by the hair and slamming her face against the floor. Shoto, witnessing Izumi's distress, immediately charged at Izuku, his fire side igniting and ready to burn him. However, Izuku was too quick. He landed a punch on Shoto's chin and mounted him, unleashing a flurry of punches. Shoto struggled to defend himself against the onslaught but found it impossible. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the scene, and Katsumi and Shoka appeared, but they froze at the sight of Izuku's eyes. As others began to rise with anger etched on their faces, Izuku was suddenly pinned against the wall, surrounded by a green aura. Izumi glared at him, her expression fierce. "You're going to wish you never did that, Deku," she warned. As the school day ended, Izuku walked away, his body and face bruised and battered. "Why am I so weak?" he muttered to himself in disgust, his fists clenched tightly. He decided to avoid going home and wandered instead, only to hear an explosion nearby. Investigating, he discovered a villain attack, a sludge villain holding a hostage. To his dismay, the hostage was none other than Katsuki. Izuku stood frozen, watching as Katsuki struggled against the villain's grip, panic and fear evident in his eyes. Their gazes met, and Katsuki's eyes filled with pleading desperation. Izuku felt a strong urge to turn away, to let Katsuki suffer for everything he had done since the day of the quirk doctor. Yet, a part of him urged him to run over and help. Suddenly, someone pushed past him, Izumi, rushing to save Katsuki. She attempted to free him using her telekinesis but struggled against the villain's stronger grip. Just then, an explosion erupted as All Might appeared, his fist extended. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Izuku looked on with disdain and anger. "Why did I want to save him?" he questioned quietly, grappling with his conflicting feelings toward Katsuki. As Izuku continued to walk, he overheard a conversation between Izumi and All Might, who revealed himself to be her father. "Dad? You're All Might?" she exclaimed in shock. "That's right, Izumi. And the truth is, I want you to be my successor by passing my quirk on to you," he declared before transforming back into his skinny form. Izuku's mind raced. What? But that should be impossible. As if reading his thoughts, Toshinori continued, while it may seem impossible, let me tell you the story of my quirk, One for All. He began to recount the history of One for All and All for One, explaining how the quirk had been passed down through generations and was given to him by his mentor, the previous number 1 hero. He spoke of Izumi's destiny to defeat All for One, knowing he was still alive, and how One for All was slowly fading from him. He needed a proper successor, and he had chosen Izumi. So, young lady, will you be my successor? Toshinori asked. Wait, Dad, what about Izuku? Why not give the quirk to him? Izumi questioned. Oh, well, he doesn't have the heart or determination of a hero. Even if I were to give him One for All, his body wouldn't be able to handle it. It needs a much stronger host, Toshinori explained. Izumi nodded, understanding. Oh, I see. Well then, I'll gladly be your successor, Dad. She thought to herself, guess what, Deku? Even our own dad doesn't see you as a hero whatsoever. This is honestly the best day ever. Unbeknownst to them, Izuku stood nearby, watching with a dead, emotionless expression. He turned away and walked toward the beach, his bruised body and vacant eyes fixed on the sunset. The sound of waves crashing against the shore had always brought him peace, a sense of calm amidst the chaos of his life. But that tranquility was shattered as he fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. These were not tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, anger, and disgust, directed at those he once called family and friends, and at himself. But, Diminity, it's always Izumi. No matter what I do, she always gets what she wants. And yet, this entire time, my own father could have given me what I wanted, what I needed. But no. Apparently, Izuku doesn't possess the heart or determination of a hero. I never even wanted to be one to begin with, he shouted, his bottled-up rage spilling over. After several minutes of crying, he finally stood up, his gaze a mix of acceptance and disgust. He stepped into the ocean, indifferent to the world around him, letting the waves drag him deeper. He accepted this new reality, but within him simmered a profound disdain for everyone and himself. He hated his weakness and felt betrayed by those who had treated him poorly or ignored his cries for help and comfort. He curled himself into a fetal position as he began to sink into the water. In his mind, Izuku swore he would never feel weak again. The thought of those who believed themselves special for possessing something unique was sickeningly pathetic to him. He knew he would be no better than them, but he would strive to be worse. If he ever returned, he would surpass them all, becoming a greater threat than any villain out there. With his eyes closed, he surrendered to the ocean's embrace. Suddenly, an overwhelming wave of pain and power surged through his mind and body, causing him to scream silently as he clutched his head. His once green hair transformed into a golden blonde, and his mind flooded with unfamiliar memories. He struggled against the tide until his body went limp, sinking to the ocean floor. A pod of dolphins swam by, nudging him gently with their snouts, their actions filled with concern. As his eyes slowly opened, a calm expression settled on his face, yet the air around him radiated authority, demanding respect. Izuku examined his hands and battered body, speaking softly beneath the water. So, it seems I've been reincarnated. In the body of a pathetic, weak human, no less. His voice dripped with hatred, disgust, and disdain. He winced at a sharp pain in his head, which gradually faded. These are his memories. Honestly, I'm not surprised. Humans are truly disgusting creatures that need to be exterminated. But my body is too weak for my full power. I'll need to train until I regain my strength. With determination, he split the sea in two, creating a path as he walked through the water. He wandered along the beach, indifferent to who might see him. Izuku Yagi was gone, dead to the world. In his place stood the Tyrant of the Seas, Poseidon. After the sludge villain incident, a sense of satisfaction and relief filled the group, though a hint of concern lingered. The girls, Shoka and Katsumi, felt mostly worried, while the others, especially Izumi, reveled in their triumph, as she was now the next holder of one for all. The group fell into silence until Katsumi broke it. "Guys, don't you think we took things a bit too far with Izuku?" she asked, her brow furrowed with worry. "And why should we worry about that useless Deku?" Izumi retorted dismissively. "He's survived worse, it won't matter." Katsumi and Shoka exchanged shocked glances, taken aback by Izumi's heartlessness, especially regarding her own brother. "Izumi, that's your brother. Don't you feel even a shred of sympathy for him?" Shoka implored, her voice laced with concern. "What if he kills himself?" The memory of Izuku's deadened eyes flashed in her mind, devoid of emotion yet filled with pure hate, anger, and disgust. Izumi opened her mouth to respond, but Katsuki interrupted. "That useless Deku won't do anything like that. He's too much of a weakling to even consider it," he snarled, and Shoto nodded in agreement. "Besides, even if he were to do something like that, the authorities would just chalk it up to school stress," Shoto added confidently. Shoka and Katsumi stared at their brothers in disbelief at their lack of compassion. "But didn't we do this to protect him?" Shoka shouted in frustration, shocking the trio with her sudden outburst. "Don't you remember why we did all this to Izuku? Izumi, you promised you'd do whatever it took to protect your brother." Her desperation was palpable as she looked at Izumi, who began to reflect on her words. She recalled the day she had promised to protect him from the dangers of being a quirkless hero. But now, as she reflected on her actions over the years, the bullying, the beatings, the neglect from their parents, and how frail and skinny he had become compared to others, horror washed over her. "Oh my God! What have I done?" she gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered the pain she had inflicted on her brother, some of which had left him with broken bones. Katsuki and Shoto rolled their eyes in annoyance. "So what? If it's such a big deal, then go fix it. Besides, why should I care about that useless freak Deku?" Katsuki said dismissively, and Shoto nodded in agreement as they continued their walk home. Katsumi and Shoka followed, their expressions filled with annoyance as they glared at their brothers. Meanwhile, Izumi walked home alone, her mind consumed by thoughts of her past actions toward Izuku. "Izuku," she murmured to herself. Upon entering her home, she made her way to her room when she heard her mother's voice. "Izumi, I heard the news from your father." Izuku Yagi, also known as Teletrix, approached her with a bright smile and enveloped her in a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed, holding her daughter tightly. "Has Izuku come home yet?" Izumi asked, a mix of concern and worry creeping into her voice, recalling Shoka's words. Izuku looked at her with confusion. "Izuku? Who are you talking about?" Izumi's shock was palpable. "Izuku Yagi, my twin brother. Your son? Don't you remember?" Her voice trembled with desperation and horror at her mother's apparent forgetfulness. Izuku paused, deep in thought, until her eyes widened with shock, horror, and realization. Without a word, she dashed upstairs, and Izumi hurried to follow her. Izumi followed Izuku into the bedroom she shared with Toshinori, her heart racing as Izuku frantically flipped through a collection of family photos. Desperation and fear filled Inko's eyes, and soon they began to glisten with tears. Suddenly she stopped, her breath hitching as she pulled a photo from the album and held it up, covering her mouth in horror and realization. "Oh my God! My baby boy," Izuku sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The photo depicted a day long ago when Izuku had taken Izuku and Izumi to the quirk doctor, a moment filled with joy and laughter. "Oh God! What have I done? I abandoned and neglected my own child. What kind of mother am I? I need to apologize. I have to make up for all the horrible things I've put him through." Izumi, feeling the weight of her mother's anguish, replied, "I'm planning to do the same thing, Mom. But maybe it's best for you to wait a little." "Wait!" Izuku exclaimed, her voice rising in outrage. "I can't just sit by and not help my own son, who I practically abandoned and neglected for years. I have to do something." "That's what I'm trying to do too," Izumi said gently. "But I think starting slow might be better. If you suddenly start apologizing, it could make things more complicated." He needs to trust us again. Inko paused, considering her daughter's words. After a moment, she nodded, wiping her tears away. You're right. I'm sure he'll be hungry when he gets back. I should make his favorite dish. Her voice trailed off as a sudden realization hit her. She knew nothing about her son. His likes, his dislikes, not even his favorite color. I really have a long road ahead to earn his forgiveness. Izumi, when will he be back from school? She asked, a mix of hope and worry in her voice. Izumi flinched slightly, her expression tense. I'm sure he'll be back soon. I mean, it's not like he has anywhere else to go, she said, forcing a nervous smile as sweat beaded on her forehead. Inko noticed her daughter's unease but decided to focus on her son for now, planning to question Izumi later. All right, then let's get started on dinner, Inko said with newfound determination. Izumi nodded in agreement, and together they began preparing a hearty meal. Just then, Toshinori walked in, announcing his return as he spotted the two cooking. Wow, I guess this is quite a celebration for Izumi, huh? He said, a hint of excitement in his tone. Actually, most of this is for Izuku, Inko replied. Toshinori's expression shifted to one of confusion. Izuku? Dear, are you sure you're all right? He asked, concern creeping into his voice. Inko and Izumi froze, the weight of Toshinori's words settling heavily in the air. Izumi realized that her father had forgotten about Izuku, and Inko was struck with shock. Toshi, don't you remember Izuku? Our son, she asked, desperation lacing her voice. Honey, I don't know anyone by that name. And brother? Izumi is the only child we had together, Toshinori replied, bewildered. Just then, a loud smack echoed through the house as Inko slapped him, a large red handprint blooming on his cheek. Tears filled her eyes. Inko? Toshinori stammered, looking at her in confusion. How could you? Inko's voice trembled with anger and hurt. How could you forget about our own son? Izuku Yagi, she yelled, her outrage palpable. Toshinori fell to the floor, shock etched across his face. Inko, he stuttered, struggling to comprehend the situation. Inko, fueled by her emotions, pulled out the photo of herself, Izumi, and Izuku, moving it into his face. Look at this. This is the same young man we've neglected for years. The young man we promised to love and care for, no matter what, she cried. Toshinori fell silent as he gazed at the photo, memories flooding back. He didn't understand how he had completely forgotten about his son. Inko. Oh God, he murmured, the realization crashing over him. Yet, even as he tried to recall Izuku's face, it eluded him. If it hadn't been for the picture, he feared he might never have remembered he had a son. Where is he right now? He asked, panic creeping into his voice. You didn't see him on your way back? Inko asked, her heart racing. No, at least. I don't think so, Toshinori replied, uncertainty gnawing at him. You don't think? Izuku could be missing, right? Inko's voice trembled with dread. Toshinori's eyes widened at the thought. How about we just wait? I'm sure he'll be back, he said, trying to reassure himself more than anyone else. Inko and Izumi nodded, though Izumi looked increasingly tense and anxious about the idea of waiting, worried about something beyond the possibility of Izuku being missing. As the family finished dinner, they waited. Time dragged on, and soon it was nearly midnight. Realizing they needed help, they reached out. So let me get this straight, Naomosa said, addressing Toshinori, who was surrounded by Endeavor, Aizawa, Nizu, Gran Torino, and several officers on standby. You're telling us that your son is missing, and you have no idea where he was last seen or heard? That's right, Toshinori confirmed, his voice heavy with concern. This is troubling indeed, Nizu remarked, his brow furrowed. And you're sure none of you know where he could have gone or what happened to him? Aizawa pressed. Inko and Toshinori shook their heads, while Izumi also shook hers, though Aizawa, Nizu, and Naomosa sensed something was off. Aizawa, skilled in detecting lies, noticed Izumi's hesitation. Naomosa, a seasoned detective, could tell from his quirk that she was withholding information. Nizu, with his sharp instincts, felt that something was amiss with the young girl. "Do you mind if we see his room? We might find clues that could give us some idea of where he is," Aizawa suggested. Izumi's body tensed slightly at the mention of Izuku's room. Aizawa noticed her reaction and realized that whatever had happened to Izuku clearly weighed heavily on her. Inko responded, guiding them toward the male twins' room. As they reached the door, Nizu was immediately hit by a familiar, nauseating smell, blood. When they opened the door, were greeted by a scene that resembled a barren mess. The wallpaper was stained yellow and peeling, while mold and mildew clung to the corners. In the far corner, a bin overflowed with old, used bandages and pieces of clothing stained with dried blood. The stench assaulted them, causing Naomosa to GG, while Aizawa covered his nose with his scarf and Nizu used a cloth to shield himself. Inko and Toshinori stood frozen in shock, expecting a neglected but typical mess, but this room looked like something out of a horror film. "What the hell happened in here?" Endeavor exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. Gran Torino glared at Toshinori, his frustration palpable. "You better explain this right now," he growled, tempted to give Toshinori a piece of his mind for being such an irresponsible father. I had no idea about," Toshinori began, but his words were cut short by a loud thud. Everyone turned to see Inko collapsed on the ground, unconscious. "Inko!" Toshinori shouted, rushing to her side. Some time later, paramedics arrived, along with Hound Dog, whose quirk was well suited for this type of situation. However, upon entering the room, he immediately retched at the overwhelming stench. Despite this, he was determined to catch a scent of Izuku to track him down. Meanwhile, the paramedics tended to Inko, assuring Toshinori and Izumi that she had merely fainted from shock and would be fine. Hound Dog emerged from the room, wiping his face, clearly having just thrown up again. "Do you have a lead?" Nizu asked. "Yeah. It's a bit faint, but it's something," Hound Dog replied, motioning for everyone to follow him. They piled into a car, following his directions to the beach. "This is where the trail ends," he said, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice. Shock washed over everyone. "No," Inko whispered, her face blank but her eyes filled with denial as tears began to fall. "This can't be right. Clearly, there's more than what we see now." Inko, Aizawa interrupted, shaking his head with a grim expression. "No. I won't believe this. There's clearly no body, which means he's out there somewhere," she exclaimed, her voice thick with denial. As Inko argued, Izumi struggled with her emotions, feeling as though she were on the brink of a breakdown. "Was this what I wanted? I just wanted to protect you, Izuku." "I'm sorry," she thought, tears streaming down her face and falling onto the sand. After a moment, she composed herself and silently made a promise. If Izuku was alive, she would be a better sister to him and a hero to support the Quirkless. Unfortunately for Izumi, her promise would mean nothing to someone who had already left this world, leaving behind a merciless tyrant. It had been 4 years since the disappearance of Izuku Yagi. Since that day, the Yagi family had never been the same, nor had Izuku. The family's depression deepened with each passing year, and so did that of Katsumi and Shoka. They were not only upset about the horrible things they had done and said to Izuku over the years but also felt like complete fools for believing their actions were meant to protect him. They resolved to become great heroes in Izuku's honor, hoping to find him one day and regain his forgiveness and trust, with dreams of marrying him afterward. All Might and Inko worked tirelessly, searching for any clues that could lead them to their son. Despite the assistance of other heroes and the police, they found nothing. As time passed, many had given up on the search, especially since the last known sighting of Izuku was at the beach, with only a photo from his 4th birthday to guide them. Some believed he had taken his own life by throwing himself into the ocean, while others thought he simply did not want to be found. Yet Toshinori and Inko never lost hope, determined to rectify their past mistakes of neglecting their son, even if it meant pursuing a ghost for the rest of their lives. Katsuki and Shoto remained relatively unchanged over the years. However, as time went on, Shoto felt a twinge of guilt seeing his sister so upset and resolved to help her as much as he could. Meanwhile, Izumi struggled more than anyone else, especially with her training under One for All alongside her father. Izuku Yagi, now known as Poseidon, had grown stronger with his quirk and a bit of One for All, but the main issue remained. Using One for All caused severe backlash, harming him physically each time he attempted to wield it. Even Toshinori, his father, was stunned and confused by the drastic effects it had on his daughter. As a result, Toshinori suggested that Izumi should use One for All only as a last resort until she could master it. Meanwhile, Izuku had spent years training in solitude after leaving the beach. For 4 grueling years, he pushed his body to the extreme, breaking bones, tearing muscles, and bringing himself to the brink of destruction, only to rebuild himself stronger each time. He also forged a new trident, reminiscent of the one he had lost to Sasaki. During this time, he resolved to become a hero, not just any hero, but one who would do whatever it took to help others, even if it meant confronting both heroes and villains alike. You might wonder why Poseidon, the god and tyrant of the seas, chose to help humanity despite his deep-seated hatred and disgust for them. The remnants of Izuku still lingered in his mind, causing a clash of ideals about humanity, heroes, and villains. Ultimately, Poseidon decided to embrace the role of a hero, albeit in a way that diverged from conventional expectations. Today marked the UA entrance exams. A tall, blonde-haired young man, trident in hand, walked towards the testing area. This was Izuku Yagi, now Poseidon, who had changed his last name to distance himself from those he once considered family. Dressed in a dark blue training jacket and matching breaths, with sneakers on his feet and his trident strapped to his back, he had wrapped the blades in cloth to prevent any accidental injuries. As he surveyed the other students, a hint of disgust crossed his mind. To think I willingly decided to be among such filth, he thought. Suddenly, someone tripped beside him, and he instinctively grabbed the back of their jacket collar, pulling them upright. "You should watch where you're going," he said, his voice stern and his gaze threatening. The girl before him had short brown hair styled in a bowl cut, revealing one of her eyes. She barely reached below his chest in height, and despite her hair partially obscuring her face, he could see the nervousness and fear in her expression. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to," she stammered, bowing her head in apology. Izuku narrowed his gaze slightly, then turned away as he spoke again. "Just don't let it happen again. Next time, I may not be so lenient." The girl remained bowed but nodded in understanding. With a dismissive huff, Izuku continued on his way to the testing area. As he walked, he heard voices he had hoped to avoid. Though his face remained calm, a simmering anger brewed within him. He turned his head to see Izumi and her friends, noting that they had grown stronger since he last saw them, yet they were still far from his level. Despite the urge to confront them, he chose to ignore Izumi's suspicious gaze and walked away. "Izumi? Are you okay?" Katsumi's voice broke through Izumi's thoughts, her expression one of mild confusion. "Sorry, it's just that guy over there. He looks almost familiar," Izumi replied, glancing back at Izuku. Katsumi also felt a strange sense of familiarity but couldn't pinpoint its source. Their conversation was interrupted by Katsuki. "So what? He's just some weak stepping stone for me, the next #1 hero," Katsuki declared, his bravado unwavering. "I think your mother hit your head too hard. It will be me who becomes the next #1 hero," Shoto countered, and the two began bickering as the girls exchanged blank stares. Despite the years, Katsuki and Shoto seemed unchanged. "Can we please just focus on the exams?" Shoka interjected, prompting the two boys to cease their argument, for the moment, and head toward the examination room. Izuku settled into his seat in the exam room, placing his trident beside him and waiting for the instructor to arrive. He remained indifferent to those around him until his gaze fell on the girl from outside, who sat a few seats away, seemingly waiting as well. When their eyes met, an unexpected sensation stirred within him. His heart raced, but it was not an unwelcome feeling. Rather, it felt oddly good. "Hello everyone. Ria Addy?" A loud, boisterous voice jolted Izuku from his reverie. He turned away from the girl, his thoughts shifting as he tried to process the unfamiliar emotion. What was that feeling? And why did it feel good? He pondered, confused by this sensation that had never surfaced before, even in his previous life. Annoyed and bewildered, he decided to set it aside for now and focus on the exam as the instructor, who introduced himself as Present Mike, explained that the exam would consist of 2 parts, a written test followed by a physical assessment. Now, you'll have at least 1 hour to complete this test. Do not cheat or look at other people's exams. You'll be disqualified immediately. And begin. Present Mike announced, prompting the students to start their written exams. Many found the test challenging, but for Izuku, it hardly posed any difficulty. After 4 years of diligent study, he felt well prepared. However, he was somewhat annoyed by the constant grammar and spelling mistakes throughout the exam. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of incompetent individual had created this test. Within just a few minutes, Izuku finished. Instead of engaging with his peers, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, and closed his eyes, waiting for the others to complete their work. When the time was up, Present Mike called for everyone to stop and instructed them to return their tests. He then began explaining the point system for the upcoming physical exams, detailing how they would be fighting robots in mock cities and how each robot would yield different points. Despite appearing to be asleep, Izuku was paying attention. However, as Present Mike continued, he was interrupted by a voice from among the examinees. "Excuse me, sir. It says here that there are supposedly 4 robots, but you mentioned only 3. If this is how UA is supposed to run, then I feel very upset. And you with the weapon." Izuku didn't bother to turn his head but opened his eyes, choosing to ignore the interruption. The student continued, "If you're not going to pay attention to anything he is saying, then I suggest you leave. And I seriously question why you're walking around with a dangerous weapon. You could seriously injure someone." Having had enough of the disruption, Izuku stood up, glaring at the student with pure anger and irritation. He unconsciously released a bit of his bloodlust, causing those nearby to struggle to breathe, even if they weren't his intended target. "Understand this," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I could honestly care less about what he has to say. If you think I don't know what he's talking about, you're mistaken. The pamphlet given to everyone before the exams explains all the robots and the point system. Present Mike is merely giving us a refresher for those who may have forgotten. But instead of letting him finish, you had to appear and distract everyone. So I suggest you shut up, you disgusting worm, or I'll make you." With that, he sat back down, and most of the people around him gasped for air, while the student who had provoked him fell to the ground, seemingly faint from Izuku's glare. "That's correct." Present Mike stammered, his voice tinged with nervousness. "The 4th robot is called the zero-pointer. It's merely an obstacle. Now, if everyone could step up and grab a card that will lead to your designated exam location." Outside the mock city assigned to him, Izuku waited for the exam to start. He noticed a few students looking nervous, but he paid them no mind. Instead, he unwrapped the cloth covering his trident, revealing the weapon in all its glory. Those who saw it felt uncomfortable, but Izuku remained indifferent to their reactions. The student from earlier wanted to reprimand him for brandishing such a dangerous weapon and for threatening him, but he had enough sense to recognize that confronting Izuku was a bad idea. Suddenly, Present Mike's voice boomed across the area. "All right. The practical exam will begin in 5.4.3. Izuku noticed the gates opening slightly and rushed in, causing a few students to stumble back. Complaints erupted, accusing him of cheating and demanding his expulsion for sending them flying. However, their response was unexpected. "What are you all waiting for? There ain't no countdown in a real battle." Present Mike shouted. With that, the students behind Izuku rushed into the city with urgency, while he casually collected points, feeling disappointed that the challenge was easier than he had anticipated. "These things aren't even that difficult to deal with," he muttered, a hint of boredom in his voice. Hell, no doubt Zeus or Shiva would find a way to turn something like this into a game. He continued to destroy every robot in sight. In the observation room, many heroes watched the exam unfold. Among them were All Might, Toshinori, and Teletrix, Inko. "Well, it seems we have quite the batch of students this year. Anyone catching your interest, Aizawa? Vlad King asked. I wouldn't say they're that decent, Aizawa replied. If anything, they need more DSPing. Well, except for her, he added, gesturing to the screens showing Bakugo and the Todoroki twins using their quirks, and then Izumi demonstrating her Telehance quirk with much better control than the twins. As for someone catching my interest, yeah, that blonde with the trident. What's his name? Aizawa said, pointing to the screen displaying Izuku sitting on the ledge of a building, looking down at the others struggling to find robots. Shouldn't he be down there getting points like the others? Why is he just sitting there? Midnight asked, confused by his actions. I'm more concerned about the trident in his hands. Present Mike exclaimed, pointing at the weapon. Maybe it has something to do with his quirk? 13 suggested. Tashinori and Inko remained silent, staring at the screen where Izuku was displayed. They felt an unsettling familiarity as they watched him. Niza decided to pull up some information about him and read it aloud. Let's see. Izuku. Poseidon? That's strange. His last name is that of the Greek god of the seas? He murmured to himself. Suddenly, he jumped slightly as a pair of hands slammed against the console beside him. He turned to see Inko, her expression a mix of worry and hope. Nizu. Did you say Izuku? She asked, her eyes beginning to water. It's a possibility. Nizu replied, glancing back at the screen, where Izuku held the trident. Despite being on screen, Nizu could sense an aura of authority around him, as if his very presence demanded respect and exuded pride and strength. Tashinori turned to Nizu and asked, Could you call him here, please? Nizu replied, We'll call him up here after the exams. Inko, anxious, inquired, What are his points at? Nizu pondered for a moment before responding, The chimera looked as his body suddenly froze stiff. Suddenly, he dropped his cup, shattering it on the ground. The staff exchanged glances filled with concern and confusion until Nizu finally said, He has over 300 points. The UA staff erupted in disbelief. What? Present Mike exclaimed, his voice muffled as a scarf wrapped around his head covered his mouth. They glanced over at a visibly annoyed Aizawa. Could you shut up? You're all too loud, Aizawa grumbled. Present Mike muttered an apology, though it was barely audible. Nizu, sensing the urgency, declared, I think it's time we test his abilities. He pressed a button, and the scene shifted to Izuku, who was perched on the edge of a building, looking down at the chaos below with a hint of disdain. He knew he had more than enough points to secure a spot in the hero course, so he felt no concern. Suddenly, the building began to shake, and the ground rumbled beneath him. He turned to see the zero-pointer rising, a giant metal monster wreaking havoc around it. I guess it's no wonder it's considered an obstacle, he muttered, preparing to walk away when a scream pierced the air. He stopped and looked over to see a brown-haired girl trapped under some rubble, while people rushed past her, oblivious to her plight. Izuku sighed in disappointment, shaking his head. And they want to be heroes. He stepped off the building, landing with a small crash as he made his way toward the girl. She noticed him and reached out, pleading, Please, I used my quirk too much and exhausted myself. Ignoring her, Izuku continued toward the approaching zero-pointer. He gripped his trident like a javelin and hurled it, piercing the creature's head and causing it to topple over with a thunderous crash. Back in the observation room, the staff, now in a state of panic, witnessed the event unfold and Present Mike exclaimed, Oh, damn. Returning to Izuku, he held out his hand, and his weapon flew back to him. He approached the girl, lifting the rubble off her leg. Phew, thank you so much for, she began, but he cut her off as he turned to walk away. Hey, aren't you going to help me? She called after him. I merely helped you survive. It is your job to help yourself. Otherwise, I will not save you a second time, he replied in a tone devoid of emotion, his gaze fixed elsewhere as he continued to walk away. Present Mic's voice echoed throughout the city, announcing, The exam is now over. Would the person who destroyed the zero-pointer please come to the observation room? Thank you. Izuku sighed in annoyance, realizing he had to deal with more interruptions. He started making his way toward the observation room. As he walked through the corridors, he thought, this had better not be a waste of my time. When he reached the observation room, he knocked on the door, and a faint voice called, "Come in." He opened the door and stepped inside, finding the UA staff waiting for him, most of them looking nervous. His gaze landed on Nizu, who seemed to feel the weight of Izuku's presence. Despite Nizu being a literal god, he sensed the need to show respect to someone who could easily overpower him. "I take it you're the one who called for me?" Izuku asked, his tone demanding. Nizu, feeling the intensity of Izuku's presence, cleared his throat. "You would be correct. The reason I called you here was to ask a few questions. Do you happen to be Izuku Yagi?" Izuku's gaze narrowed, and he released a hint of his killing intent, sending shivers down the spines of everyone in the room. Nizu, taking the brunt of it, saw something he never expected, the specter of death looming behind Izuku. "It's best not to call me by that repulsive name," Izuku warned, his voice deep and threatening. "Before I take your tongue and end your life, vermin." The staff, struggling to remain composed, were shocked that the very person who aspired to be a hero had just threatened the principal. "Then how would you like to be addressed?" Nizu asked, trying to maintain his calm despite the threat. Izuku sighed, clearly annoyed. "Just Izuku Poseidon. Is there any other reason why I'm here, or are you just here to waste more of my time?" He began to calm his killing intent. Before Nizu could respond, Inko spoke up. "Izuku." Tears filled her eyes as she almost failed to recognize him at first. But when she saw his eyes, she knew immediately that it was her son. "My baby boy," she said, taking a step toward him, but the overwhelming killing intent radiating from Izuku made her falter. She fell to the floor on her hands and knees, nearly passing out from the pressure. The others in the room struggled to stand, some collapsing to their knees, gasping for air. Izuku paused, observing the effect he had on them. "Speak to me like that again, and I will kill you without a hint of mercy," he warned Inko, his tone deadly serious as he stared down at her. His eyes glowed with a mix of hate, disgust, and loathing. While his tone sent shivers down everyone's spine, some could see the look in his eyes. Even though they weren't facing him directly, they could tell he was serious, and they knew they had to ensure no one got on his bad side. Tashinori gritted his teeth, finding it nearly impossible to stand. "Izuku," he managed to say, his voice strained. Izuku turned to him, his expression cold. "I don't recall giving you permission to call me by my name. Besides, I'm not Yutsuno. He died when you claimed he didn't possess the heart or determination to be a hero." Although his gaze was not directed at Tashinori, he knew his words were striking their mark. All Tashinori could do was look down, clenching his fists in shame and disappointment. "Where did I go wrong?" he thought, feeling the weight of his failures. "Inko," he said, his voice trembling, "please. I'm sorry." Izuku brandished his trident, preparing to strike her down. Panic surged among the others as none could move to stop him. "No, let's not do that, please." Izuku paused, narrowing his gaze at the principal. Despite Nizu's calm demeanor, Izuku could sense the terror radiating from him. "And you think you have the power to order me?" Izuku challenged. Nizu raised his hands defensively. "Not at all. I understand your longing to kill them here and now, and I don't doubt that you could easily eliminate everyone in this room without facing any consequences. However, I believe it would be a waste of your time and energy to kill someone, especially a hero, who poses no threat to you." Izuku recognized Nizu's tactic. Though he wouldn't admit it aloud, the principal wasn't wrong. He could indeed kill everyone present without difficulty. Yet, despite his urge to end Inko's life at that moment, he realized it would be a waste of time and energy. With a resigned sigh, he stopped releasing his killing intent and strapped his trident to his back, crossing his arms over his chest as he turned his gaze elsewhere. "Very well. Consider yourself lucky," he said sternly, making his way to the door. "But know that there won't be a next time." He paused, glancing back at Nizu. "Unless you have other things to say, I suggest you say them now." Nizu cleared his throat. "Just so you know, you're in Class 1A, and you'll be the class representative." Izuku nodded silently before walking out, leaving the others gasping for air, trying to regain their composure. Nizu, visibly sweating, turned to Aizawa. Sorry for throwing this on you of all people. Aizawa sighed. It's fine. I wanted him in my class anyway. Present Mike, still shaken, interjected, so we're just going to ignore the fact that he basically threatened Nizu and nearly killed Teletrix? His voice trembled at the thought of being in a class with Izuku, especially if he was making death threats he intended to carry out. Inko sat on the floor, crying. The innocent young boy she had searched for 4 years was gone, replaced by a cold, stern, heartless monster who showed no fear in threatening to kill his own mother. Fast forward to the first day at UA. Izuku walked through the halls, partially dressed in the school uniform. He wore a white button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled past his elbows, a nearly tied tie, gray dress briefs, and dress shoes. As he wandered the halls, he took in his surroundings until he reached Class 1A. The giant door, towering over him, made him scowl. He had an idea of why such a door existed. He opened the smaller door beside it and was immediately met with the sound of heated arguments. Katsuki and another student from the exams were bickering about Katsuki's feet being on the school desk, while the others looked on with annoyance at his prideful antics. Izumi, noticing the door open, turned and recognized Izuku immediately. Her parents had told her what had happened after the exams. While she wanted to be angry at him for attempting to kill their mother, she couldn't help but feel he had every right to do so, especially in light of everything. Izuku, she called out, drawing the attention of the others. Katsuki and the other student halted their argument, both turning to face him. Ignoring her, Izuku took a seat and pulled a book from his bag, beginning to read quietly. The student from the entrance exams zoomed over to him. Hello there. My name is Tenya Lida. I would like to formally apologize for my rudeness during the exams. I hope we get along well as classmates. He bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. Izuku merely responded with a short, continuing to read. Lida, sensing Izuku's longing for solitude, quickly zoomed away, knowing what he was capable of from the exams. He understood when it was best to leave someone alone. Katsuki, however, was not so easily deterred. Where the hell have you been? You suddenly disappear and show up all high and mighty. You think you're better than me? He shouted, his voice echoing in the room. Izuku remained silent, turning the page of his book and completely ignoring Katsuki's presence. This only seemed to infuriate Katsuki further, who began to use his quirk, small explosions erupting in his palm as he glared at Izuku. Answer me when I'm talking to you, Deku. Katsuki demanded. Still, Izuku did not respond, maintaining a calm expression. However, those who looked closely could see a hint of annoyance flickering in his eyes. Aizawa, concealed in his hiding spot, sighed as he sensed that trouble was brewing. He was about to step out to defuse the situation before it escalated, especially since he had a gut feeling that Izuku was aware of his presence. He couldn't explain how he knew, but that instinct had never failed him, particularly during missions. Just then, a certain brown-haired girl entered the scene. Hey, you're the guy who destroyed the zero-pointer, she exclaimed, pointing directly at Izuku, who was engrossed in his book and oblivious to the commotion around him. Lida interjected, I understand you wish to be left alone, but it's very rude not to respond to people. He emphasized his point by chopping the air with his hand. Izuku, still ignoring them, felt his annoyance rising, and he began to contemplate more drastic measures. However, a voice interrupted his dark thoughts. It's best not to get on his bad side, Aizawa warned, stepping into view. The class, except for Izuku, turned to see their homeroom teacher. The last thing the school needs is a couple of dead students, Aizawa continued, his tone calm yet chilling. And trust me, he will kill you if you annoy him enough. His words sent a shiver down the spines of the students, with the exception of Katsuki and Shoto, who dismissed Izuku's demeanor as mere bravado. The rest of the class silently agreed to stay on Izuku's good side, though they were unaware that achieving that was nearly impossible, especially since they had already annoyed him. Anyways, I'm Shota Aizawa, and I'll be your homeroom teacher for the next 3 years, he introduced himself, placing a box on the table and holding out some clothes. Grab your size and head to the training ground. But sir, the brown-haired girl began, but Aizawa cut her off. If I even hear the first letter of the word orientation come out of your mouth, I'll expel you faster than All Might can say, plus ultra, he replied in a slightly bored tone as he left the room. The class exchanged confused glances, trying to make sense of their teacher's behavior. Izuku, uninterested in the drama, quickly grabbed a uniform in his size and headed off to change, followed slowly by the rest of the class. Once at the training ground, Izuku was the first to arrive. Aizawa, surprised by his promptness, remarked, "You're the first one here," noting the change in Izuku's demeanor and prideful attitude. However, Izuku remained silent, his gaze averted. Aizawa sighed, realizing it would be challenging to engage him, so he decided to let it go for now. As long as Izuku listened and refrained from harming his classmates or UA staff, Aizawa was willing to overlook his aloofness. Soon, the rest of the class arrived, and Aizawa regarded them with mild annoyance. "You're 5 minutes late. We'll need to work on that during our time here. Anyway, we'll be doing a quirk apprehension test. It's similar to the fitness test you do in school, but this time you'll use your quirks." A few students perked up at the mention of using their abilities. "I want the person who got first place on the exam to step forward," Aizawa instructed. Both Izuku and Katsuki stepped up, prompting Aizawa to look at Katsuki incredulously. "I said the person who got first." "You got third," he clarified. Katsuki's eyes widened in disbelief. "H. Then who the hell got first?" "That would be the person you yelled at this morning," Aizawa replied, pointing at Izuku, who stood with his arms crossed. Katsuki glared at him, his scowl deepening. "Deku! How the hell did you get first?" he shouted, but Izuku ignored him completely, walking toward Aizawa and stepping into the designated circle. Enraged, Katsuki charged at him, ready to unleash his quirk. "Stop ignoring me, Deku!" he yelled, but before he could act, Aizawa's scarf wrapped around him, restraining him and rendering his quirk useless. "That's enough out of you. Now stop, or I'll be expelling someone much sooner than I anticipated," Aizawa warned, his voice steady. Reluctantly, Katsuki backed away, growling at Izuku. As Izuku stood in the circle, he reeled his arm back, and the class gasped in shock as the muscles in his throwing arm bulged significantly. He launched the projectile, creating a massive crater beneath him and sending several students reeling from the force of the throw. When the results appeared, both the class and Aizawa were taken aback. 1,632,567 meters? The class exclaimed in unison. "Despite the high number, I can tell you were holding back your full strength," Aizawa noted. "Normally, I'd reprimand you, but considering certain circumstances, I'll let it slide." The class looked on in shock and confusion, while 2 students glared at Izuku with jealousy and anger. "Dude, he wasn't even using his full strength? That is so manly," one red-haired student exclaimed. "This is going to be so much fun," a girl with pink skin added. Izuku face-bombed and shook his head in annoyance at their reactions. "Fun, you say? How's this for fun? Whoever comes in last will be expelled," Aizawa announced with a wild grin. Class 1A gasped in unison. "What? But sir, that's unfair," the brown-haired girl protested. An annoyed sigh escaped Izuku as he gazed at the sky. "You think this is unfair? Peach, then you are all bigger fools than you realize." "H, the class responded, bewildered. "What's that supposed to mean?" a student with lightning bolt hair asked, slightly offended. Izuku continued, "Think about it, you dimwit. The world itself is completely unfair. There are villain attacks, natural disasters, diseases, RP, murder, and quirkism, all happening around the world on a daily basis, even as we speak." He emphasized the term quirkism as he pressed on. "And if you think what I'm saying is too much for your pathetic weak minds to handle, then you can leave right now, and no one will stop you." Silence fell over the class. No one dared to argue back, for Izuku had spoken nothing but the cold truth. Aizawa thought to himself, "Demon. I mean, I would have said something similar, but he really gave them a reality check." As I reflected on my approach, I realized I could have been gentler. Aizawa was right. Every day outside these walls, something terrible, unpredictable, and unfair happened. It was the responsibility of the staff at UA to prepare students for that harsh reality. "Welcome to the UA Hero course," he announced. "We'll skip the exams and get straight to the results." He began listing names. Izuku Poseidon, Izumi Yagi, Shoka Todoroki, Shoto Todoroki, Katsumi Bakugu, Katsuki Bakugu, and Mineta Minuro. Mineta, the last name called, was curled up on the ground, sobbing. "Oh, that whole expulsion thing was just a lie," Aizawa added, a hint of amusement in his voice. Class 1A gasped in unison. "Wait, you all thought that was true?" a black-haired girl asked, her brow furrowed. "Maybe I should have said something?" "Do you think?" the others exclaimed, their voices rising in disbelief. Izuku, however, remained skeptical. "I wouldn't be so sure of that," he said, glancing at his classmates, who looked puzzled. In his last class, he expelled everyone for slacking off. He wasn't lying about the expulsion. As he walked away, his back to the group, he continued, "He was serious. He wants everyone to give it their all. If they don't, he'd rather not teach the next generation of heroes than have a class that half-buttes their way through." His words left Class 1A stunned. Meanwhile, Aizawa couldn't help but smile beneath his scarf. Izuku had accurately captured his intentions. He found himself growing fond of Izuku, despite his usual demeanor. Something told him that Izuku had him on a tolerable list. In another part of the room, two parents watched the test unfold. Inko sighed, her voice tinged with longing and regret. "He's gotten so much stronger." "Yeah," Toshinori replied, his thoughts spiraling into regret. "Why did I follow in my father's footsteps?" "Toshinori, you absolute idiot." Inko turned to him, determination in her eyes. "Toshi, we have to find a way to get him to forgive us." "Yeah, but how? He won't even look at us." "I doubt Izumi and her friends will fare any better," he replied, frustration creeping into his voice. Inko fell silent, deep in thought, until an idea sparked in her mind. It was another day at UA, and Class 1A buzzed with energy, though one reincarnated god sat bored and slightly annoyed in the classroom. His classmates wouldn't leave him alone, especially his sister. There had been many moments when he was tempted to rip her heart from her chest, but he opted to ignore her, along with Shoka and Katsumi, who both seemed to harbor romantic feelings for him. He didn't reciprocate. After all, his old self had lost all romantic inclinations when they had treated him poorly upon learning he was quirkless. Besides, why would someone like him need a romantic companion? He had never bothered with one before, and he saw no reason to start now. Yet lately, something had been bothering him. He had crossed paths with a brown-haired girl from the exams, Kinoko Komori, who was in Class 1B. Every time he saw her, a strange feeling stirred in his chest. He didn't understand it, but it felt good. At the same time, it troubled him because he had never felt this way about anyone since before his death. "Man, I wonder who's teaching us today?" Denki mused. "Maybe it's one of the other teachers or staff members?" Mina suggested, her pink skin glowing with excitement. "Most likely," Azui added, "but we can't say for sure." Izumi, however, was too busy gazing at her brother, sadness and longing etched on her face. He never looked in her direction, no matter how hard she, Shoka, or Katsumi tried to engage him. "Izuku," she thought, her heart heavy. Izuku was lost in his thoughts when he suddenly heard loud thumping approaching the classroom. He was the only one who noticed, and he sighed deeply. "You've got to be kidding me. I am here. Coming through the door like a hero," Toshinori announced, bursting into the room. Izuku rolled his eyes, thinking, how exactly is that supposed to be heroic? Toshinori was followed by Inko, and the excited chatter of students filled the air. Unfortunately, they didn't hear the voice they had hoped for, so they focused on the class instead. Toshinori explained that they would be doing a joint exercise with Class 1B. As Inko pressed a remote, several walls slid away to reveal briefcases, each labeled with different numbers. The class buzzed with excitement, except for Izuku, who stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by. When everyone else left to change, Izuku stood up to follow, but a hand landed on his shoulder. You best take that hand off now, he warned, glaring over his shoulder. Toshinori flinched and quickly withdrew his hand. Izuku turned to face him, arms crossed over his chest. Do that again, and I'll cut your hand off. Now, what do you want? He said, his gaze fixed on the floor. Inko hesitated before speaking. Izuku, we noticed you didn't fill out a form for your hero costume, so I went through some old designs and thought. Stop, Izuku interrupted, cutting her off. If you think I'll wear something as ridiculous as whatever is in there, you're a bigger idiot than I first thought. I won't wear anything made by you or that resembles him. Lastly, I want nothing to do with either of you. Bother me again, and you won't like the consequences, Izuku warned, his voice dripping with venom. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving his parents in stunned silence. Inko felt as if she might crumble under the weight of her emotions, but Toshinori reached out and took her hand, offering a small comfort. It helped, though it did little to mend the ache in her heart caused by Izuku's harsh tone. I was hoping it would work, Inko murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't worry, Inko, Toshinori reassured her. Maybe with some time, he'll come around. Inko held tightly to the case containing the hero costume she had discovered among her old designs from UA. She had even modified it to suit Izuku's tastes. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. You're right, Toshi. Maybe we should give him some time. Together, they made their way toward the training area. As they arrived, the rest of Class 1A and 1B were already in their respective hero costumes. Toshinori beamed with pride. Looking mighty heroic, everyone, he exclaimed, giving a thumbs up. But then he noticed something was amiss. Has anyone seen young Izuku? I thought I told you to keep my name out of that mouth of yours, came a voice, and everyone turned to see Izuku in his hero costume. The sight sent the girls into a frenzy, their cheeks flushing crimson. Komori, Katsumi, and Shoka blushed the hardest. Holy muscles! Mina and Setsuna exclaimed, and the reaction was immediate. Most of the girls suffered massive nosebleeds, some even fainting as steam rose from their faces. Komori and a few other girls from Class 1B were already on the ground, unconscious. The boys had mixed reactions. Some were envious of the attention Izuku received, while others, like Mineta, envied his physique. A few remained indifferent, but Katsuki and Shoto were clearly irritated by the attention Izuku garnered. After the girls composed themselves, All Might and Teletrix, Inko, explained the training exercise and how teams would be decided by drawing lots. Lita raised his hand, questioning the method. Excuse me, but why should the teams be decided by lots? Shouldn't it be easier to pair up with those we know better? Before Toshinori could respond, Izuku interjected. As heroes, there will be times when we have to work alongside different heroes, both experienced and less experienced. Whether their quirks are suited for the task is something we'll have to adapt to. His tone was calm but emotionless, tinged with annoyance as he stepped forward to take a number before returning to his spot. As Izuku waited for everyone to get their numbers, he turned to see Komori smiling at him. Well, looks like we're partners, she said, though he noticed a hint of nervousness behind her smile. He replied noncommittally. So, what's your name? Komori asked as they were led to another room to watch the other students participate in the exercise. Izuku, he answered in a monotone voice. Nice to meet you, Izuku. I'm Kinoko Komori, she introduced herself, striking a little pose. What do you think of my costume? Izuku glanced at her outfit. He wouldn't lie, she looked cute, at least in his opinion. You look very nice, Komori, he said briefly. Oh, thanks, she beamed, hugging him unexpectedly. Caught off guard, Izuku hesitated but eventually returned the embrace with one arm, fighting off a blush as confusion swirled within him. What is wrong with me? He thought, bewildered by his own feelings. Meanwhile, Katsumi and Shoka glared at Komori with jealousy. It wasn't just that Izuku ignored them, it was that Komori had seemingly stolen their chance with him. Shoka's body began to steam as she glared, while Katsumi clenched her fists, small explosions crackling from her palms. Komori, surprised by the hug, blushed deeply. She had expected Izuku to be stern and serious, but perhaps he had a softer side. Once they released each other, they waited for their turn, watching the other students participate in the exercise. Finally, it was their turn to face off against Bakugo and Kirishima, and they stood outside the building, waiting for the signal to begin. "Komori," Izuku said, turning to her. "Yeah," she replied. "Be very careful. I'll deal with Bakugo." "Okay then. Guess I'll look for the bomb," she said, understanding his silent agreement. "And Izuku," she added, a determined look in her eyes. He responded. "Good luck," she said, her voice filled with encouragement. "A being such as me doesn't need luck," he replied with a hint of arrogance. "Heroes may enter," Toshinori announced through the intercom. With that, they stepped into the building, making their way to the second floor. As they walked down the hall, Izuku suddenly grabbed Komori and leaped backward, narrowly avoiding an explosion from Katsuki, who looked ready to explode with anger. Setting Komori down, Izuku signaled for her to find the bomb, and she understood, leaving him alone with Katsuki. "All right, you useless Deku. It's high time I put you in your place," Katsuki shouted, but Izuku didn't even glance at him. "He's annoying as always," Izuku thought, remaining unfazed. "Why don't you look me in the eye, Deku? Huh? You think you're better than me? Because newsflash, you ain't better than me." Katsuki seethed, his frustration boiling over. "Why would I bother looking at someone who is far beneath me?" Izuku said casually. "And besides, why would I think of myself as better than someone when I already am?" Hearing those words, Katsuki charged at Izuku in blind rage, unleashing explosion after explosion. Izuku, however, lazily dodged each attack, reflecting on his situation. Despite being more genetically evolved, even that mortal I fought before reincarnating was faster than this Pomeranian worm, he thought. In the observation room, the rest of Class 1A and 1B, along with All Might and Inko, watched the fight unfold. "Man, they're really going at it, huh?" Denki remarked nervously, observing Katsuki's ferocity. "I wouldn't really say that," Kendo replied, looking at him with a questioning expression. "Your blonde friend down there isn't even taking the fight seriously." She noted how Izuku seemed to be barely trying to avoid Katsuki's attacks. All Might and Inko watched the monitor with expressions of hurt and regret. "Izuku, my boy, I'll have to give you one for all. I know it will be in safer hands with you, and your sister is willing to give it to you. You truly deserve this quirk," Toshinori thought. Inko's heart ached. "My baby boy, you've gotten this strong, and we were never there to watch you grow. I'm so sorry. If I could go back in time and stop myself from making such a mistake, I would do so in a heartbeat." Back in the fight, Katsuki's anger grew as he realized that the person he swore to defeat was not even fighting back. "Why don't you fight me, Deku?" he shouted. Izuku remained silent. "How come you haven't used your quirk yet? I bet it's as lame as that mushroom girl," Katsuki taunted, which seemed to irritate Izuku. But Katsuki, in his typical reckless fashion, continued, "Maybe when I'm through with you, I'll show her place underneath my boo." His words were cut short as he was sent crashing into a wall at the end of the hall, feeling the intense gaze of Izuku upon him. "You dare lay a single hair on her, and I'll kill you in the slowest and most painful way you couldn't even imagine," Izuku said, his tone deadly serious, his glare fierce enough to make even the Grim Reaper shiver in fear. Taking a deep breath to compose himself, he turned his back on Katsuki and began to walk away, intending to find Komori and check on her progress. Katsuki, hearing a click from his gauntlet, smirked like a madman. "Hey, Deku," he called out as he managed to extricate himself from the wall. Izuku turned around, annoyance creeping in as he realized this fight was going nowhere. He saw Katsuki wearing a triumphant smirk. "You know how my quirk works, right?" Katsuki asked, prompting Izuku to raise an eyebrow in curiosity but remain silent until Katsuki explained that his gauntlets were not just for show, they helped create bigger explosions. "Young Bakugo, that's enough. You could kill him," Toshinori shouted. "Not if he effing dodges," Katsuki retorted, pulling the pin on his gauntlet. A massive fireball shot toward Izuku, who looked at it unimpressed. Just before the explosion reached him, he swiped his hand, creating a massive smoke screen that filled the entire hall. The force of the explosion shook the building, causing Komori and Kirishima, who were engaged in their own fight, to exchange confused glances. Komori felt a twinge of worry for Izuku. In the observation room, everyone was shocked at the sight of Katsuki seemingly having killed Izuku. But as the smoke cleared, their shock deepened. Katsuki's fury intensified when he saw that a wall of water had blocked his attack. Everyone wondered if that was Izuku's quirk, especially Class 1A, who had heard all the introductions but never learned what his quirk was. If he declared himself quirkless, then how could he do that? Is that his quirk? Lita asked, bewildered. Honestly, I'm surprised he has that much control over it, Sato commented. Yeah, but I'm curious how he gained so much water in such a short time, Siro added. Momo pondered this for a moment before a realization struck her. Water molecules, she exclaimed. Everyone looked at her, confused, until she explained. Basically, from what we're seeing, we can deduce that he has a form of water manipulation quirk. They all nodded in agreement. So, from what we can see, he has such a high level of control that he can utilize the water molecules in the air around him, Momo concluded. Good assumption there, Miss Yaoyorozu, Inko praised her. Oh, it was nothing, Momo replied, a bit embarrassed. Yeah, but if you guys remember from the quirk apprehension test the other day, he bulked up his throwing arm tremendously. So maybe he has two different quirks. Jairu suggested. I mean, that wouldn't be the most illogical answer we can come up with. The Todorokis have two different quirks, Kendo added. Many people nodded in agreement, but two others had thoughts about why he might possess two quirks that diverged from the students' ideas. Back at the fight, Izuku maintained his water wall while Katsuki's anger escalated. So you've had a quirk this whole time, huh? You looking down on me, Deku? He shouted. Having had enough of Katsuki's antics, Izuku decided to engulf him in a ball of water. Katsuki couldn't use his quirk to escape since it required his sweat. After a minute of thrashing around, he fell limp. Izuku considered leaving him there but ultimately decided to spare him. For now. He broke the water ball, and Katsuki collapsed to the ground, unconscious and soaked. Afterward, Izuku went to find Komori and check if she needed assistance with Kirishima, only to find her standing over an unconscious Kirishima, breathing heavily. Together, they touched the bomb and were announced the winners. Upon their return, they were met with mixed expressions, some filled with awe and worry, others with anger and jealousy. Izuku, Inko began, while I commend you for utilizing your quirk to incapacitate your opponent, what you did could have killed him. She scolded him, but Izuku merely ignored her, his cold gaze filled with hatred, loathing, and disgust. He made his way to the farthest corner of the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes closed, unwilling to see anyone else. This behavior seemed to push her to her breaking point, but Toshinori, ever the caring husband, took her hand to calm her down. While it helped somewhat, it could only do so much. As the others continued with their exercises, Inko rushed out, desperate to avoid letting the students see her cry. Toshinori promptly followed her, instructing the students to return to their respective classes. At the end of the day, Izuku was in the classroom, preparing to leave when he was blocked by Izumi. Izuku, what the hell is wrong with you? She shouted, her outrage palpable. Izuku didn't even look at her, he merely raised an eyebrow. Why would you do that to Mom? Do you have any idea how hurt she was seeing her own son look at her like that? Izuku walked past her, completely ignoring her words, but paused just long enough to respond. And tell me this, why should I care about a woman who cared very little for her own son for many years? With that, he left the building, leaving his sister to ponder his words. A few days later, Izuku made his way toward UA. As he approached the entrance, he was met by a large crowd of reporters. Why are there so many annoying worms? He thought to himself. Suddenly, the reporters noticed him and began bombarding him with questions. What is it like to be taught by the number one hero? How do you feel about having All Might as a teacher at UA? Do you think pineapple belongs on pizza? Having had enough of the incessant questioning, Izuku released his killing intent, causing the crowd to back off immediately. I will only say this once, stay out of my way, Or the next time you come near me, I'll kill you, he warned, his eyes cold and hardened as he stared down the reporters. Some of them were so frightened they peed themselves or fainted. Seizing the opportunity, Izuku stepped past the entrance, leaving the baffled and somewhat scared reporters behind, wondering how Yue could allow someone like him in. You know, you should really count yourselves lucky, a voice called out to the reporters. They turned to see Aizawa sitting on the roof of the entrance, looking down at them with a tired expression mixed with annoyance. He understood Izuku's frustration with the reporters. I would take his warning seriously if I were you all. Trust me, he advised. A female reporter shouted, Wait! You're a staff member here. Then tell us, why exactly does Yue accept students like him? Especially since you claim that he would kill us. You want answers? Talk to Nizu. He's the one who accepted him here, Aizawa replied, though he thought to himself that it was mostly because Problem Child would have skinned Nizu alive and turned him into a fashion disaster if he had refused to let him enroll at UA. With that, he hopped off the roof and began to walk away. The reporter, dissatisfied with his answer, attempted to get past the entrance, only to be blocked by a metal wall. Later that day, Izuku found himself in the cafeteria with Komori and a few of her classmates. Among them was a blonde who believed Class 1B was superior to 1A, except for Izuku, who had proven his capabilities during combat training and was not someone to provoke. There was also a dark green-haired girl who could split herself into many pieces and a ginger-haired girl who could enlarge her hands and was a martial artist. Although Izuku didn't particularly like everyone at UA, with a few exceptions among the staff, he considered Komori somewhat tolerable. He might not like her or her friends now, but perhaps he would grow to appreciate them. At their table, they were discussing the role of class representatives for their respective classes. You know, I would say it's surprising for someone to already be labeled the class representative on day one. But considering it's you, I think it's best not to question things, Itsuka remarked. Izuku didn't respond, merely humming in acknowledgement with a curt nod. Komori looked at him with curiosity and a hint of worry. Izuku, can I ask something? Why don't you interact with your own class? It's been a few days since the battle training. They're merely too annoying and too pathetic to bother with, he replied in a straight, serious tone. This prompted the group to exchange glances before facing him again. Then what about us? What makes us any different? Setsuna asked, raising an eyebrow. Izuku was about to respond when Monoma interjected. Isn't it clear, Setsuna? The reason is that he clearly sees Class 1B as superior compared to them, he declared with a smug smile, eyes closed. The others at the table, including Izuku, stared at him blankly. Suddenly, an alarm blared, sending everyone into a panic. People pushed past each other, yelling and screaming. Izuku grabbed a running student by the back of their jacket collar. What is going on? Why is the alarm going off? He demanded, his voice calm yet annoyed. It's a level 4 security breach. It means there's a villain or more attacking the school. This is the first time it's happened in UA history, the student explained in a panicked tone before Izuku let them go. As they continued to run, Izuku glanced over at Komori, noticing her distressed expression. Something in him snapped. With a hardened gaze, he pushed his way through the panicking crowd in the cafeteria until he reached a window. Looking outside, he saw that it was indeed some of the reporters from that morning. He spotted some of the staff trying to ensure the reporters didn't advance further onto the campus. Realizing the cause of the alarm, Izuku made his way back toward the others. He stood atop the table, unleashing his bloodlust throughout the school, causing everyone to freeze in fear. Some students fainted from shock, while others wet themselves. Now that he had their attention, Izuku spoke up. This is just pathetic, he declared, his voice cutting through the silence. Some of you are here to become the next generation of heroes, yet a mere alarm goes off, and suddenly you all run in panic like a bunch of headless chickens. One student, unable to tolerate the insult, shouted back, Hey! It's not our fault. There could be a villain right on campus. Izuku turned his glare towards them, making the student shiver. A villain? Maybe instead of reacting immediately to an alarm, you should take a look and see the cause of that alarm. He pointed toward the window. The students followed his gesture and looked outside, only to see that there was no villain, just a group of reporters. "Tell me," Izuku continued, "how can you call yourselves the next generation of heroes when a few mere reporters trespassing can cause you to panic?" Silence fell over the group as they absorbed his words. Not even a whisper broke the stillness. They couldn't help but agree with him, despite the harshness of his critique. They felt foolish for their earlier reactions. Izuku remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the window as he sensed something amiss in the area. He stepped off the table and began to leave the cafeteria, heading back to class, with Komori and the others quickly following him. Someone else must be the cause of the alarm, he thought. No doubt the staff knows about it by now. But why set off the alarm at all? Time passed, and the day of the USJ arrived. Everyone from Class 1A was on the bus. Izuku sat alone until Shoka decided to join him. Her presence annoyed him greatly. He wished he could simply ignore her. Yet, he knew he had to endure it for now. Shoka, sitting beside the one she admired, felt her heart race as she took in his sculpted physique. It was a struggle for her to keep from blushing or fainting. "Hey, Izuku," she stammered, glancing at him, but he turned away, focusing on the scenery outside as the bus began to move. After a while, she tried again. "How have you been?" Izuku continued to ignore her, which only deepened her disappointment. She looked down on the verge of tears. Shoto, observing the scene, felt anger rise within him at Izuku's neglect of his sister. Others in the class noticed this dynamic as well, and one student was about to speak up when Tsuyu intervened. "Hey, Izuku," she called out, but he refused to look her way. This behavior had caused many in the class to lose respect for him since the beginning of the school year, as he rarely spoke to anyone or even acknowledged their presence. Tsu, slightly annoyed but not overly concerned, pressed on. "Look, I know you can hear me, so I'll just ask. You and Izumi seem to know each other pretty well. What's your relationship with her?" Izumi, eavesdropping, perked up, curious about their connection. "I was once her brother until I disowned myself from the family," Izuku replied, not even glancing in Tsuyu's direction. "Since then, we are nothing more than strangers." His words shocked many in the class. The siblings looked and acted nothing alike. Izumi was outgoing and friendly, while Izuku was cold, ruthless, and reserved. Aizawa, overhearing the exchange, thought to himself, "I can't blame him for saying that, considering everything he's been through." Tsuyu wanted to ask more, but Aizawa interrupted. "Everyone quiet, or else you'll be expelled." His stern voice silenced the room, though a few students shot glares at Izuku. Eventually, they arrived at the USJ and entered, where they were greeted by the space hero, 13. "Hey there, Class 1A. Welcome to the unforeseen simulation joint," 13 announced cheerfully. Uraraka gasped, "Oh my god. 13. You're my favorite hero." 13 responded with bashfulness, "Oh. It's always nice to meet fans." Izuku, watching the exchange, felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He remembered being like that once. 13 began explaining the USJ and the rescue training they would be undertaking. As they spoke, Izuku noticed a large, mist-like wall forming in the center of the USJ. He watched as multiple figures emerged from it. After a moment, Kirishima exclaimed, "Oh hey, we even have fake villains." The teachers exchanged confused glances. "Fake villains?" 13 echoed, bewildered. Izuku, however, pointed behind them. "Those aren't fake. Those are real villains." His words sent shockwaves through the class, sending fear rippling through them, except for Izuku, who remained calm. "Aizawa, protect the students at all costs." 13 shouted as he leaped down the stairs to confront the villains. 13 ordered the students to evacuate, but they were blocked by a wall of mist. "Sorry, but I'm afraid I can't let you do that," a voice said from the mist. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" 13 demanded. "Kurogyri," the figure replied, "and we are the League of Villains. Our goal is to kill All Might." At this revelation, the class grew increasingly anxious, even Izumi feeling a twinge of fear. Izuku, however, merely raised an eyebrow at the declaration. Izuku couldn't help but wonder why anyone would waste their time trying to kill that blonde buffoon. Surely, they could find something more productive to do with their lives. Kurogyari, however, had other plans. "It seems he isn't here at the moment," he said, a hint of malice in his voice. "Perhaps killing a few of his students will draw his attention." At that moment, Katsuki and Katsumi charged forward, their quirks primed for action. "Like hell we're letting that happen," they shouted in unison, launching a simultaneous attack that sent an explosion toward the villain. The rest of the class braced themselves for a fight, but Izuku merely sighed. In annoyance, face-palming as he thought, do they really think physical attacks will work on him? Lita managed to slip past Kurogyari, who was distracted by the Bakugo twins. As Lita sprinted toward the exit, Kurogyari attempted to use his quirk to stop him, but 13 intervened, using her quirk to hinder Kurogyari's actions. With no other option, Kurogyari created a portal in front of him and another behind 13, causing her to injure herself in the process. 13. Some of the class exclaimed in alarm as Kurogyari unleashed his mist, teleporting random students to various locations within the USJ. Izuku found himself submerged in water, surrounded by numerous villains who regarded him with predatory grins, eager for what they perceived as easy prey. Unfazed by the situation, Izuku watched as one of the villains charged at him, sporting a shark-like mutation. "This is just too easy," one villain taunted, but his bravado quickly faded into confusion as he froze in place. The others turned to see their comrade pierced by a trident. Izuku yanked the weapon from the lifeless body, his expression shifting to one of disgust and annoyance. His eyes were devoid of empathy or mercy. Meanwhile, on the surface, Tsuyu and Mineta were in a boat, both panicking at the chaos unfolding around them. Tsuyu remained relatively calm, while Mineta was a bundle of nerves, praying fervently for the situation to be a nightmare. "I'm too young to die. Please, God, let this be a bad dream," he exclaimed, only to be smacked by Tsuyu. "Mineta, you need to calm down," she urged, trying to rein in the perverted boy before she considered throwing him overboard. "How can I calm down when we're in the worst situation imaginable?" he shouted, his fear palpable. Tsuyu was about to respond when she suddenly froze, her eyes widening in horror. Mineta followed her gaze, only to feel the water around them growing warmer and redder. The surface was littered with blood and floating bodies, some missing limbs or bearing gaping wounds. The realization struck them. These were the villains they had narrowly escaped. Suddenly, something shot from the water and landed on their boat. They turned to see a soaking wet Izuku, and their expressions shifted to fear and uncertainty as he spoke in a detached tone. "The water is safe to cross." Without waiting for a response, he leaped back into the water, surfacing on dry land. Izuku scanned the area and spotted Aizawa finishing off the remaining villains. Noticing a couple of villains approaching, he used his speed to position himself beside them, skewering both in the side simultaneously. He pulled the trident free as they collapsed to the ground. Tsuyu and Mineta reached the shore, their shock deepening as they witnessed the aftermath of Izuku's actions. "Mr. Aizawa was right. We should be grateful he hasn't killed us yet," they thought in unison. A pained scream broke through the tension, and they turned to see Aizawa being slammed into the ground by a monstrous creature. Izuku started to rush over, but Izumi charged at the creature first. "Let go of him," she roared, channeling One for All and her quirk to bolster her strength. She delivered a powerful punch, but to her dismay, the creature remained unscathed. It retaliated, slapping her away and sending her crashing into the stairs, barely conscious. The creature prepared to deliver a killing blow to Aizawa, but he vanished just in time. The creature turned to see Izuku carrying Aizawa over his shoulder, gently setting him down. Aizawa looked up, reaching out as if to stop him. "P problem CLD," he stammered, trying to warn Izuku. "Get him out of here and back to the others," Izuku instructed Tsuyu and Mineta, who nodded and quickly assisted Aizawa away. Izuku's gaze returned to the creature before him. "Aizawa, I may not say or show it, but you are one of the very few people who have my respect, not only as a person but as a hero." He then noticed a figure with a hand FTSH, assuming he was the mastermind behind the attack. "I demand to know who you are and what this thing is," Izuku said, pointing his trident at the creature in a commanding tone. Grr, call me Shigaraki. We're the League of Villains. As for that thing, it's called a Nomu. But it's pointless to face it. It was designed to take on All Might in his prime. Nomu, kill him, Shigaraki ordered. The Nomu screeched and charged at Izuku, while the others watched in horror, fearing for their classmate's life. Izuku, however, merely leaned his head to the side, effortlessly dodging the creature's punches, one after another. From the perspective of the others, it appeared that Izuku was struggling, his movements a blur to their eyes. "Oniai!" she gasped, blood spilling from her lips as Uraraka and Mina rushed to support her. "I know he boasts about his strength," Uraraka said, her voice laced with concern, "but I never thought I'd see him struggle like this." "Yeah," Mina added, her brow furrowed with worry. "It seems like he hardly has time to launch an attack." Katsumi and Shoka exchanged anxious glances. Katsumi gritted her teeth, while Shoka clenched her fists tightly. "Damn it. We have to do something," Katsumi urged. "But we can't," Shoka replied, her voice trembling. "We can't compete with something designed to take on All Might, in his prime, no less." Izuku continued to evade the onslaught when he suddenly sensed an incoming threat. A small spear of ice hurtled toward him from the side. He attempted to block or destroy it, but the Nomu struck him, sending him skidding several feet away. The Nomu screeched and prepared to attack again, but then froze, staring at Izuku. Everyone else seemed to freeze as well, confused by the sudden stillness of the creature. Then they felt it, a massive wave crashing over them. It was Izuku's bloodlust, spreading throughout the USJ like a flash flood, forcing everyone to their hands and knees, struggling to breathe. The Nomu knelt, experiencing a sensation it shouldn't have been able to feel, fear and dread. Yet, this bloodlust wasn't directed at the Nomu, it was aimed at two very specific individuals on the sidelines, Katsuki Bakugu and Shoto Todoroki. "You vermin dare to strike me without even facing me?" Izuku growled, swinging his trident horizontally. The Nomu's head fell from its shoulders, splitting into 3 pieces as its body collapsed to the ground, signifying its death. Izuku's face twisted into a scowl of pure anger. Shigaraki watched the scene unfold, his mind swirling with fury, though overshadowed by the fear coursing through him. Impossible. The Nomu was supposed to be stronger than All Might. Does that mean he's stronger than All Might? The weight of Izuku's bloodlust suggested it might be true. Disgusting. Wretched pieces of filth. Izuku muttered to himself as he advanced toward Katsuki and Shoto. "Keikurojiri. Get us out of here," Shigaraki ordered, his voice trembling. The misty villain enveloped them in black mist, and they vanished. Izuku paid them no mind, his focus solely on Katsuki and Shoto, who had dared to attack him while he wasn't looking. He stood before them, his eyes devoid of empathy, burning with rage. He raised his trident, ready to end their lives. Suddenly he leapt back, dodging a barrage of bullets. He turned to see the other staff members had arrived, though they appeared to be struggling against the overwhelming bloodlust. Beside them stood All Might, his expression serious yet strained. "Now, Mr. Poseidon," Nizu spoke up, attempting to calm the raging force before him. "I don't know why you wish to kill them, but why not handle this in a more civilized manner? Preferably one that doesn't involve you killing them." Izuku merely stared at them, absorbing Nizu's words. Gradually, he managed to contain his bloodlust, though it still lingered around him. "Consider yourselves lucky," he said coldly. "But the next time we face each other, there will be consequences. And no one, not even the strongest beings in the world, will save you from my wrath." With that, he turned and ascended the stairs, his displeasure and annoyance evident on his face. Tashinori reached out to him, hoping to calm his son, but instinctively dodged to the side as Izuku's trident scraped his injured side, causing him to fall to his knees, clutching the wound. Izuku walked past him, and Tashinori called out, "Son, why did you attack me?" Izuku paused, his back to Tashinori. In a shocking moment, the tip of his trident hovered mere centimeters from his father's neck. Tashinori's heart raced, he hadn't even seen it coming. But he noticed the green aura surrounding the trident. His wife and daughter had intervened just in time. Izumi looked as though she was fighting to stay conscious, while Inko appeared to be struggling even more. The look in Izuku's eyes sent a chill down Toshinori's spine. They were the eyes of someone who cared little for who they killed. After a tense moment, Izuku withdrew and walked away, uttering, "Don't call me your son. You never bothered to care for me, so why should I care for you or anyone else from that pathetic family? Honestly, you and your family could drop dead at this very moment, and I wouldn't even care." The shock of his words reverberated through everyone present. Even Nizu was taken aback by the scene unfolding before him. Izuku had just attempted to kill the number one hero, his own father, and declared that he would remain indifferent even if his family were on the brink of death. One thing was certain: everyone in Class 1A, minus 2 individuals, now feared Izuku. They had witnessed his strength and realized he could kill them without a second thought and likely escape unscathed. With the sports festival approaching, it was only a matter of time before he decided to take a life. Days passed since the USJ incident, which officials had dubbed as such. Nizu had decided to grant the students of UA a week-long break from school, allowing them to rest their minds after the recent events. In truth, the decision was largely influenced by Izuku's intense hostility toward Katsuki and Shoto. In his office, Nizu sat with the UA staff, discussing the USJ attack and the subsequent alarms, pondering their possible connections. The atmosphere shifted when a particular topic arose. "All right then," Nizu began, "I'll have the authorities investigate this League of Villains before more incidents occur. Now for our next topic. Izuku Poseidon." As soon as Nizu uttered the name, the entire staff stiffened, a shiver running down their spines. Some members visibly squirmed at the mention. With the annual sports festival approaching, Nizu continued, "I believe it's crucial we understand the situation we may face, should the need arise." "Yes, Mike?" He glanced at the English teacher, who had raised his hand. Just out of curiosity. He's not going to be involved with the festival in any way, right?" President Mike asked. "Actually yes," Nizu replied. "I intended to discuss a few matters regarding the festival with him." Several teachers paled at his words, the calmness in his voice unsettling. "Note that we've observed he harbors a great disdain for most of the other students here, along with a few staff members," Nizu said, casting a glance at Toshinori and Inko. Toshinori had required medical attention after Izuku inflicted a large gash on him, while Inko appeared emotionally strained by everything Izuku had said. Clearing his throat, Nizu continued, "For now, our primary focus should be ensuring that Izuku doesn't decide to kill anyone anytime soon. Unless it's a villain in self-defense, of course." The staff needed a moment to process his words before turning to Nizu with expressions of shock. "What?" they exclaimed in unison. "Nizu, not that some of us question your ideas, but what the hell?" Midnight interjected. Inko added, "You can't be serious. You're just going to let Izuku kill villains?" "Exactly," Toshinori exclaimed, rising from his seat despite the pain in his side. "We're heroes. We don't kill villains no matter what." Nizu listened patiently to the staff's protests about allowing Izuku to kill villains until he finally slammed his paws on his desk and shouted, "If you would let me finish, you impatient dumbass." The room fell silent, the staff taken aback by Nizu's rare display of anger. They settled back into their seats, allowing the chimera to take a deep breath and regain his composure. "The reason is simple," Nizu explained. "Even if we argue against Izuku's idea of killing villains, he would either not care and proceed to do it anyway, or he would eliminate anyone who stands in his way. Therefore, the best course of action is to accept that he will kill them, at least as long as he agrees to do so in self-defense." "But sir," Vlad King interjected, "how do we know he'll even agree to such an idea? I understand he's very strong and could kill us without hesitation, but how can we be sure he won't abuse this notion?" "That's why I plan to discuss this with him alongside Aizawa," Nizu replied, gesturing toward Aizawa, who was wrapped in bandages and resembled a mummy. Aizawa nodded in agreement. "From what I've gathered during our time together in class," Aizawa said, his voice slightly muffled by the bandages, "Izuku believes that strength is paramount. If your words aren't backed by your own strength, he considers you weak, both metaphorically and literally. Ectoplasm chimed in. So you're saying Izuku is basically a shark trying to fit into a small pond? Aizawa shook his head. Try a full-grown whale trying to fit into a public swimming pool-sized aquarium. With a fish inside that he doesn't care about unless we provoke him. The staff had never considered Izuku's strength in that light. After witnessing the deaths and bloodshed he had caused at the USJ, they were all grateful he had chosen to become a hero. If he had opted for villainy, they knew they would be in grave danger. Meanwhile, Izuku was wandering the city with Komori, having bumped into her unexpectedly. She had invited him to hang out with her and some classmates. Part of him wanted to decline, but the thought of getting closer to Komori swayed him, and he agreed. Throughout the day, Izuku spent time with her and her friends, feeling a genuine sense of happiness for the first time in a long while. He smiled in their company, particularly enjoying Komori's presence, and decided to embrace this newfound feeling. At the end of the day, Izuku returned to his apartment, which he had purchased after leaving the Yagi family years ago. Today was actually pretty good. I don't think I've smiled like that in a long time, he thought, a small smile creeping onto his face. He settled in for the evening with a book, but soon his eyes grew heavy, and he drifted off to sleep. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself surrounded by 7 individuals seated in chairs, one of whom appeared more ethereal or transparent than the others. Izuku Yagi, we've been expecting you, the first figure said. Izuku regarded them with a hardened gaze, his eyes glowing menacingly. It would be best for you not to speak that name. Izuku Yagi is dead. Whatever you wish to be called shouldn't matter, the second figure replied. What matters is what you plan to do in the future. Sensing that this was a conversation he could not avoid, Izuku sighed and waved his hand, transforming the space into a regal conference room. He took a seat at the far end of the table. Now tell me, what is it that needs my attention? It better be worth my time. We wish for you to inherit one for all, the first figure stated. Izuku raised an eyebrow in curiosity, but it quickly furrowed in annoyance. Tell me this, why should I bother taking a power that I don't need to begin with? The one for all quirk is completely rejecting Izumi, your sister, one of the previous users explained. Or, if we're being honest, your sister is dying from the quirk itself. This revelation caught Izuku's attention, and his gaze shifted to them, demanding an explanation. One for all is both a blessing and a curse, the first user continued. It grows stronger with each person it's passed down to, and it can supercharge a person's quirk to levels beyond mere strength. However, it's also a curse. If someone has a quirk before inheriting one for all, their life force will be slowly drained, binding their soul to the quirk. A quirkless person wouldn't face this problem. Izuku interrupted, finishing their thought. So, because my sister had a quirk before inheriting it, she's dying? And the more she uses the quirk, the sooner she'll die. They nodded in response. How bothersome, he muttered, exhaling a sigh of annoyance. This was a complete waste of my time. His words shocked the previous users, who had hoped that, deep down, he still cared about his family. How could you say that? The fourth user exclaimed in outrage. Izuku seemed unfazed by the outburst, though his eyes narrowed slightly, finding the voice annoying. Your sister, your own flesh and blood, is dying, and all you can say is that it's a waste of time? What the hell is wrong with you? The fourth user continued, but he was quickly told to calm down before he made the situation worse. In the hallway, the sound of someone sniffling and lightly sobbing caught Izuku's attention. He turned to see the only female member of the group, her teeth clenched and fists balled in anger. Why? Why, no, how do you not care? She sobbed. And you are supposed to be? Izuku replied, his gaze hardening into a glare directed at her. The woman shivered under his intense stare, a feeling she hadn't experienced since facing All for One. Nana Shimura. You're grand. Shut up. He cut her off, his glare turning murderous. If looks could kill, Izuku's gaze would have committed mass murder. Nana felt as if she were in the presence of death itself. The killing intent radiating from him rivaled that of All for One, if not surpassing it. The fact that you dare call yourself my grandmother is revolting, Izuku said coldly. Honestly, I don't even know what you saw in that blonde buffoon. But know this, when his time comes, I will be the one to take his life. Just like my dear sister. His words shocked the previous holders even more. You can't, the first user protested. If you kill your sister, you'd be destroying the purpose of One for All. He tried to convince Izuku that if he followed through with his words, there would be no one left to stop All for One. The purpose? Izuku scoffed. If I remember correctly, the purpose of this quirk was to defeat All for One, a being said to have lived for centuries due to the multitude of quirks at his disposal. Yet you, he focused on Nana, entrusted your idiot of a student to finish a fight he failed years ago, passing the mantle to his own daughter, whom he inadvertently killed without even knowing. Silence fell over the group. Not a single argument was heard as they absorbed his words. This was beyond what they had planned. They had hoped to convince Izuku to willingly take One for All from Izumi after discussing it with her and Toshinori. Now, they felt like failures for not managing to convince him, like fools for trusting Toshinori to choose a worthy successor, and disappointment in themselves for failing to defeat a being like All for One. Izuku huffed out a sigh of annoyance. As I said, a complete waste of my time. With that, he swiped his hand, severing the connection with the One for All users and finding himself in a place where he felt more relaxed. He took a deep breath and let himself unwind. Meanwhile, Izumi lay down after an intense training session, only to find herself meeting with the previous One for All users. Their expressions reflected conflict and defeat. I take it things didn't go well? She asked. The first user let out a deep breath, unsure if he should tell her that Izuku, her own brother, was plotting to kill her, their father, and likely Inko in the future. Listen, Ninth. We need to talk to you. It's about you and your brother. Izumi sensed the seriousness of the situation, especially since it involved Izuku. Weeks passed after the USJ incident, which those present referred to as the USJ massacre. In the following weeks, UA and law enforcement struggled with news reporters trying to uncover what had happened. The sight of traumatized students and the bodies being carried out sparked curiosity, but many were also hesitant to learn more. When they saw that All Might was injured, the more daring reporters began investigating by reviewing security footage from a nearby camera at the building's entrance. The footage caused an uproar of confusion. Many questioned whether what they saw and heard was true. All Might, the number one hero and symbol of peace, had neglected his own biological son for years? Not only that, but said son had attempted to kill his own father. Some reporters sent this information to their news connections, while others began looking into the identity of Izuku Yagi. An investigation had begun concerning the young man and the various schools he attended while growing up, particularly Aldra Junior High. The findings were potentially more disturbing than any case of quirkism ever recorded. When the public learned about this, reactions varied widely. Many were outraged that All Might, the symbol of peace, had neglected his own son, allowing him to be bullied and practically tortured by his peers simply for being quirkless, without intervening. Others were skeptical, unwilling to believe that someone like All Might could permit such treatment, especially towards a member of his own family. One thing was certain, All Might's reputation had suffered significantly, particularly among the quirkless community, who empathized with Izuku's struggles. They understood the challenges of growing up without a quirk, but none could fathom the extent of the physical and mental torment he had endured. Some went so far as to hurl insults at All Might and boo him during public appearances, forcing him to step back from hero work until the situation calmed down. When the class returned from break, they were shocked by the news. A few students questioned Izumi and her friends, demanding to know why they had acted as they did, while others hoped the rumors were false. But Izumi, her head bowed, confirmed the truth. "It's true," she said softly. The class gasped, some covering their mouths in horror. "Are you serious?" Ojiro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Izumi nodded, unable to meet the eyes of her classmates. "So what?" Katsuki's voice cut through the tension, his usual prideful demeanor returning as if nothing had happened between him and Shoto during their near-death experience at Izuku's hands. That useless freak deserved it. He was just born at the wrong place at the wrong time. Before he could say more, Kirishima punched him, sending him sprawling to the floor. Anger and disappointment etched on his face. Kirishima glared at Katsuki. "That's completely unmanly for you to say, Bakugo." "What?" "He was only speaking the truth," Shoto chimed in, attempting to defend Katsuki's statement. "That pathetic freak shouldn't have been born in this time. If he couldn't find a way to fit into society, then clearly he didn't belong in the world." His words were abruptly interrupted when Momo slapped him across the face with a frying pan, gripping the handle tightly as she glared at the number 2 hero's youngest son. "When did you ever have the right to decide who belongs where in the world?" Izuku may be difficult to understand or get along with, but at least he isn't blatantly racist towards everyone he sees as weak and pathetic. Some of that last part is partially true though. Mineta added nervously, only to receive a swift slap to the back of his head from Tsuyu. "Even if that's true," Momo continued, "at least he makes it known he dislikes us. He isn't afraid to express his thoughts and feelings in front of those he has to work with. Unlike you all." She pointed the frying pan at Izumi and the other girls before continuing. "I just want to know one simple thing. Why did you do it? To your own brother, no less?" Izumi hesitated, unsure if she should reveal the truth. But she hoped that understanding their reasons might lead to some forgiveness. "We did it to protect him." "Protect him?" Shuji asked, utterly confused. Shoka added, "We wanted to protect him from becoming a hero. When we were younger, we all dreamed of being heroes. But when Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless, we were terrified he would die trying to become one, or that he would perish while doing hero work. So we planned to use our quirks to scare him away from that path." "And so you thought it was a good idea to beat and practically torture him for years?" A tired, annoyed voice interrupted. The class turned to see Aizawa, who, despite wearing fewer bandages, was still recovering from the USJ incident. He could move around a bit more now, but his anger was palpable. "Before you say anything, I knew about the neglect. But everything else." His quirk activated, his hair floating and eyes glowing ominously, making him appear more demon than human. "You better give me a very good reason not to throw you out of this school in cuffs." Now, Aizawa. Let's not act hastily," Nizu interjected, though disappointment was evident on his face. He turned to Izumi and her friends. "I spoke with your parents about this situation, and they are very angry and disappointed in you. I know many students and staff here, especially Aizawa, want nothing more than to see you expelled and blacklisted from every other hero school in the country." Izumi and her group stiffened at his words. "That was exactly what I was going to do, even after the argument I had with your parents, yours especially, Ms. Yagi." Izumi froze in shock, realizing the gravity of his statement. But then she sensed a shift. Nizu seemed to have changed his mind for some reason. Aizawa, curious, asked, "And what made you change your mind, Nizu?" Nizu fell silent for a moment, a smile creeping onto his face. Aizawa, having worked with Nizu for years, recognized that smile all too well. He knew it wasn't a matter of what had changed Nizu's mind, but rather who. "Let's just say that I had quite the conversation with someone before coming here. Isn't that right, Izuku?" Nizu said, as Izuku stepped out from behind him, a grin on his face. However, the glint in his eyes hinted at something deeper. The atmosphere was tense, and it was evident that whatever they had discussed was far from pleasant. Izuku nodded in agreement, his expression serious. Principal Nizu addressed Ms. Yagi and her group, stating, "For now, you and your group will not be expelled from UA. However, if there is even a hint of bullying or misuse of your quirks on anyone at UA campus who is not involved in training, you will face expulsion and be blacklisted from every other hero school in the country. Furthermore, Izuku will take action against you and your group, with or without your parents' knowledge or permission." The members of Izumi's group, Class 1A, gasped in shock. Aizawa, observing the scene, couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. He thought to himself, what's more frightening, Izuku smiling or the two of them working together? Izumi felt a knot form in her stomach. He wouldn't really do that to his own sister, would he? She wondered nervously, swallowing hard as she caught sight of Izuku's smile. A few days later, the mood in Class 1A had noticeably shifted. The lively atmosphere had diminished, and the relationship between Izumi, her group, and the rest of the class had grown strained. As they chatted quietly, the door swung open to reveal Aizawa, bandaged and with an arm in a cast. The class fell silent at his entrance, and Aizawa felt a flicker of pride at the change in their demeanor. "All right, let's get started," he announced, addressing the class. Mr. Aizawa, shouldn't you be resting? You took quite a beating at the Tsu said, her voice tinged with concern. "My health is not your concern," Aizawa replied. "If it weren't for Problem Child here, my injuries would have been far worse. For that, I thank you." Izuku simply nodded, acknowledging the compliment. "Moving on, your fight is not over yet." Aizawa's tone was serious and cryptic, causing the class, except for Izuku, to tense up. They feared they would have to face more villains. Some of the more timid students glanced around nervously, while Aizawa continued, "It's almost time for the UA Sports Festival." "If that's the case, why start with something cryptic?" the class murmured, confused by his serious tone. "Is there a problem with how I talk?" Aizawa asked slowly, activating his quirk. The class fell silent, and Aizawa smirked slightly. "That's what I thought." He proceeded to explain the details of the sports festival, highlighting the various activities, including food stalls, games, and an annual combat tournament. However, Izuku seemed distracted, staring out the window at the clouds, while many in the class speculated about his inevitable victory in the tournament. The real question was whether he would show mercy. Meanwhile, two students plotted how they could humiliate Izuku during the tournament. Ida spoke up, "Sir, how much time do we have to train for the festival?" "You will have 2 weeks to prepare. Until then, do whatever you want," Aizawa replied as the bell rang, signaling the end of class. He then crawled into his sleeping bag. As the students filed out for lunch, they began discussing their training plans. Izuku opened the door first, only to find a large crowd of students gathered outside. "Whoa, it's the guy who tried to kill All Might," one random student remarked. "I'm surprised they haven't expelled him yet," another added. "Quiet, he can hear you," a third student warned. Ignoring the comments, Izuku noticed a few of his classmates struggling to navigate through the crowd. "What's going on with these guys?" Kirishima asked.